কি হলো? হচ্ছে তো, দেখা যাচ্ছে।
হ্যাঁ না মানে ওটা হঠাৎ মাঝখান থেকে খুলে গেল কেন? এক মিনিট।
দেখি রে।
এক মিনিট, মাঝখান থেকে খুলে গেছে, আমি দেখছিলাম তো ওটা থেকে খুলে গেছে। So good evening everybody. Good evening my respected teachers, my juniors, dear juniors. So today in coming 40 to 45 minutes, as the time permits, we will try to discuss the approach, how we go when a baby comes with respiratory distress. And our main learning objective will be to diagnose and grade the severity of the respiratory distress. We'll list the common causes. We will not go into the detail because this is given in every textbook. We will learn how to differentiate respiratory cause from cardiovascular causes and other systemic conditions. We'll learn about the initial assessment and general management of treatment with respiratory distress, and recognize and manage common conditions, having some cases with TTN, RDS, and MAS. I thought of giving pneumonia also, but I found it's becoming very lengthy. So pneumonia, PPHN, and BPD, I think we can take another separate class, and also congenital diaphragmatic hernia, we will cover in a separate class. So coming to the introduction, why respiratory distress occurs in 4 to 7% of all newborns. It is less common in term and more common in preterm. All of you know that, and it is inversely proportional to the age. So less is the age, more is the incidence of respiratory distress, and it is to the tune of 60 to 70% of babies who are below 1,000 grams. Now in preterm, respiratory distress is mostly RDS. In late preterm and term, it is mostly TTN. Now, the National Neonatal Perinatal Database of India shows that TTN accounts for the most common cause of respiratory distress in India, and it accounts for 40 to 45% of all cases. MAS is the second common, that is, it is meconium aspiration syndrome is common in India, and it is the second most common. It accounts for around 29%. RDS, though we get quite a lot, but according to the NNPD data, it is to the tune of 4%, pneumothorax 3.4%, and pneumonia to the tune of 2 to 3%. But these data are taken from centers who have inborn patients. When we consider outborn patients, the data changes. So there, the most common cause of respiratory distress is MAS and pneumonia. Even the case fatality rate differs in inborn and outborn newborns, as we can see in our setup also. So the case fatality rate is around 25% in inborn cases, where it raises to about 40% if we take into account the outborn cases. Now, the definition of by the NNPD is presence of any two of the following. So you have to have two criteria: either respiratory rate more than 60 per minute, subcostal and intercostal retraction, and expiratory grunt. So any two of the criteria is there, you will call it as respiratory distress. So why there is tachypnea in respiratory distress? Tachypnea is mainly to maintain the minute ventilation. So if you know what is minute ventilation, it is respiratory rate into tidal volume. So in disease condition, the tidal volume decreases. To maintain the minute ventilation, the respiratory rate increases. So it's a compensatory mechanism. So why there is supracostal and intercostal retraction? This is because a diseased lung has a less compliance. So the lung compliance decreases, and newborns and even in infants, they have a compliant chest. It is very pliable chest. So to maintain this, to compensate for the decreased compliance of the lungs, they have causes retraction, subcostal and intercostal retraction, to generate sufficient pressure to have inspiration. Now, expiratory grunt. So grunt is a noise which you hear mainly in the expiration due to sudden closure of the vocal cord. So this is mainly why this is maintained. This is to maintain intrinsic PEEP, and it prevents alveolar collapse. So especially we see it in respiratory distress syndrome in preterms when there is a tendency to alveolus to collapse. The baby forcefully blocks, closes the vocal cord to generate an intrinsic PEEP, and that we hear as a grunt. So presence of any two of the following, you will take it as RDS. But not only this, if there are other features like nasal flaring, flaring is usually to increase the cross-sectional area of the upper airway, up in the nasal area. Cyanosis, apnea, stridor, and suprasternal retraction also indicates respiratory distress. And this is, you have to remember that stridor and suprasternal retraction, these are always signs of extra thoracic obstruction. So depending upon the place of obstruction, you might have expiratory stridor or biphasic stridor. So we are not going into detail of this because congenital air malformation, though common in newborns, it is very easily picked up by stridor, and you can have cases like laryngomalacia, laryngotracheobronchomalacia. You can have laryngeal wave, all will present with this stridor and suprasternal retraction. Now, very important when one comes for with respiratory distress, you have to grade the severity. And what are the two scores we have? These are often asked in the exams, mainly for the postgraduate stream. These are the Downey score, which is used in both term and preterm, and Silverman-Anderson score, usually used for preterm. Now, Downey score correlates more with blood gas parameters and sensitivity of blood gas parameters and to detect hypoxemia, and it has a sensitivity of 88% and specificity of 81%. Whereas Silverman-Anderson score correlates more with the mortality. It is said that if a preterm having a weight of less than 2 grams has a Silverman-Anderson score of more than 3, it's going to have a higher mortality. So basically, these scores help to decide about the respiratory support, what type of respiratory support we are going to give. Oxygen therapy, CPAP, HFNC, or ventilation. So we have to deciding on this score. And of course, serial measurements of this score helps to decide improvement or worsening. Initial management of respiratory distress, initial assessment of TABC. We will come to this later on, just a summary how scores helps. So we will assess the severity. If the score is 0 to 3, start supplemental oxygen. There is only one exception. If it is a preterm with a score of 0 to 3, you might not start supplemental oxygen, you might start CPAP, especially in very preterms, like if it is a 28, 29 weeker. So if the score is 4 to 6, you usually start CPAP and identify CPAP failure early. If there are CPAP failures, we go to mechanical ventilation. Whereas score more than 6, or if there is poor spontaneous effort as seen in CNS causes, neuromuscular causes, or if there is shock, cardiovascular instability, or if there are contraindications of CPAP, like as I was saying, tracheoesophageal fistulas, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, then airway malformations, you should go for mechanical ventilation. Now this is Downey score or respiratory distress. This is commonly used, and this has 5 parameters: respiratory rate, cyanosis, air entry, grunt, and retractions. All the parameters are given, are graded in 0, 1, 2, 0 to 2 basis, and then the scoring is done. So I'm not going into detail. Everyone, all the PGTs should know this because these are often asked in the neonatal exams. And this is Silverman score. Here also we see 5 parameters. What are these? This is upper chest movement, lower chest retraction, xiphoid retraction, nares dilatation, and expiratory grunt. The confusion lies in the first criteria. This is upper chest movement criteria, where grade 0 is taken when it is synchronized. When in inspiration, we know the abdomen moves up and the chest is also moving up. So this is synchronized. So this is 0, no distress. So if there is mindless stress, there will be abdomen is going up. As you can see with the arrow, the abdomen is going up, but the upper chest is lagging. It's going up, but going slower. It's very difficult to assess, truly speaking. And grade 2 is seesaw. You see, this is abdomen is going up in inspiration, while the chest, which also should have gone up, is going down. So this is seesaw. So this is grade 2. And the rest very easy. You can see this is lower chest instruction. 0 is none. Red 1 is just visible. Red 2 is easily. It's the same for all. And the last one is expiratory gland. None. Heard with stethoscope and heard by ear. So now this is the way how we score the Silverman-Anderman score. Now which score is better? Now there is a study recently in the St. John's Medical College, Bangalore, and it has been found that down score is better even in preterm babies. We used to think Silverman-Anderson score is better, but even it is, and it is better. It has a better accuracy. It is easier because, as you can see, Silverman-Anderson score may have subjective variation. If you observe, a variation will be there. So it is more accurate, more reliable, and easier to use by primary health personnel. And this is the chart showing the down score takes much lesser time than Silverman-Anderson score. And this is the chart showing the accuracy of the scores by the subject. And as you can see, both interns and nurses, they do more accurately the Downer score rather than Silverman-Anderson score. You might be thinking why the nurses are doing better than the interns in Silverman-Anderson score, because usually the nurses were in the NICU for a prolonged time, and so they have a better experience than some of the new interns. Now coming to the causes, as you can know, we will just highlight the headings. So the headings are the airway problems, as you can know, all this laryngomalacia, tracheomalacia, starting from nose, choanal atresia. Then you might have vascular rings compressing the trachea, waves, and all those things. Now pulmonary cause is the major cause, where we get mainly this TTN, this PPHN, this MAS, this pneumonia, this RDS. Also, you have this congenital anomalies of the lungs, this is cystic adenomatous malformations, and so on. I think we will not go into the detail of this cardiac, but very important is this other. Thoracic is also important. Thoracic, often we have to see for skeletal dysplasias, and very important thoracic dystrophy. This is, I think, in my first year, I have seen a case of thoracic dystrophy, and during my NICU, we have seen another case of thoracic dystrophy, and I could recognize it on seeing on the first day. And thanks to Dr. Ghosh for showing us so many dysmorphic cases. And this other is very important. In neonates, the other causes are very important is sepsis. You have to always think of sepsis, and you have to be sepsis minded. Everywhere you have to rule out sepsis. Very important is temperature. So hypothermia both can cause us respiratory distress. Hypoglycemia, glucose is a very important thing. So hypoglycemia, and very, very important and often missed is anemia or polycythemia. Both causes respiratory distress. So take care of these other causes, because sometimes the examiners just wanted to know all the causes. Now, when a baby comes with respiratory distress, how we initially assess? We quickly do TABC, ABC for older children, and TABC for neonates, and also sometimes in infants. So temperature is very important. So TABC, we will see the airway temperature, airway breathing circulation. We will see the blood glucose. It is always done when a child comes with an NICU or any neonatal setup. And you have to do the respiratory scoring, but you have to be very quick and act very promptly. And of course, you have to identify the signs of respiratory failure. So if the baby is in failure, you will not waste time to do the next part, the history and physical assessment, but quickly stabilize the baby. So these are the signs of respiratory failure clinically: cyanosis, gasping, choking, apnea, or bradycardia. So once you have stabilized baby, or if baby is not in a severe distress, you take a quick examination, take a history and physical assessment. So history will include this antenatal, intranatal, and postnatal history. So some of the antenatal histories are related to the specific things, like if you have a RDS, you will of course ask for prematurity and antenatal steroids, all these things. If you have a TTN, you will ask for whether it was cesarean sections, whether the mother had a history of diabetes mellitus, which is common in RDS and also in TTN. And of course, you will also ask if there is a history of asthma. So family history of asthma is a indicator, it's a risk factor for TTN. So go on asking like things like polyhydramnios. Polyhydramnios is common in tracheoesophageal fistula. You can get polyhydramnios also in neuromuscular disorders. If you have oligohydramnios, you will think of pulmonary hypertension. So there are things, these are very beautifully charted in, I think in AIMS also, AIMS protocol, JIPMAR protocol. So we go through that. So antenatal history, internatal history, but ask relevant questions. Don't go on just asking questions, and postnatal history. Now examinations, vitals part of it will be covered in assessing TABC. And of course, remember the fifth vital, that is saturation. We'll come to that pulse oximetry in detail, but that should be done. And provided their perfusion is good. If you are checking the saturation and the perfusion is not good, it's not going to give a correct result. So check for the CRT, check for the neurological status, dysmorphism, and of course, in the thoracic ear, you should see for the inspection. You should look for scaphoid abdomen. It is called, if you get scaphoid abdomen, think of CDH. Thoracic abnormality, as we were seeing, thoracic dystrophies or skeletal dysplasias, you can see, and also inspections of the respiratory system. Palpation has hardly any role in neonate. Auscultation of chest, yes, of course, to see whether the bilaterally you can see the audible sounds are there or not, whether there is wheeze or crackles, so you can see. Examination of other systems, starting cardiovascular system, you should see for hepatomegaly and others. And of course, if there is any neuromuscular abnormalities. Now, there are certain special tests which are relevant in respiratory distress. Truly speaking, these tests are not needed in most of the NICUs who are equipped with a portable X-ray. So here we, whenever we get cases, we assess and immediately order for a chest X-ray. So these special tests are often not needed. These tests are gastric aspirate check test and transillumination. Hyperoxia is something different, will come later. So gastric aspirate check test, how it is done, it's often asked. You take a 0.5 ml of the gastric aspirate, mix it with a 0.5 ml of 95% ethyl alcohol, put it in a test tube, check it for 15 seconds and cork it and check it for 15 seconds and then make it to stand for 15 minutes. So if you get a bubble covering the entire rim of the tube, the test is positive, means there is a minimum chance of RDS, and this test is very highly specific. In one study, it has been shown that if it is positive, none of the newborns develop RDS. But this test is not that sensitive. So sensitivity is around 70%. That means negative test means what? You are not getting a bubble, or intermediate means you are getting a partial bubble covering partial circumference. So in that case, it is negative. So negative test doesn't mean all of them will develop RDS. Around 60 to 70% will develop RDS. Now, transillumination, as you know, we do it when we suspect a pneumothorax. Very important, it is sometimes asked when we are putting a fiber optic light, we see a halo around the light. So this is not transillumination test, but transillumination to be positive, you have to have a halo on the point diagonally opposite to the point where you have exerted the light, where I put the light, sorry. So this is to detect the pneumothorax, but these two are rarely required because we do chest X-ray immediately and we get the reports very early. Now, this hyperoxia test. So when we have a doubt whether it's a cardiac and or a pulmonary, we do hyperoxia test. So we can, I'm discussing it now only. So hyperoxia, what we do is not done in our unit. We have we always refer to cardiologists, and we are fortunate that we can do the echocardiography. So hyperoxia test, it was described quite in, I think, 1970s or so, when there was not very much availability of echo was not there. And here we see the baseline PaO2, taking the blood from the radial artery, right radial artery. That's preductal. It is always preductal. So we take it from the right radial artery and see have a baseline PaO2. And then 100% oxygen is given for 10 minutes. And then it is again seen. The PaO2 is seen. If it is more than 200, so it's most likely a pulmonary and not a cardiac cause. If it is between 150 to 200, you cannot definitely say. And if it is less than 150, it is mostly a cardiac and most likely a cyanotic cardiac heart disease. But there are certain limitations to this test. So if you have a TAPVC or if you have a DAPVC, or if you have, I forgot something. So in that you might not have a you might not have this hyperoxia test, may not be positive. And in pulmonary cause, like in RDS, if it is severe enough, if you do a hyperoxia test, sometimes it may not be more than 200 millimeter. So these are not done because we get a quick echo done. So these are the tests which can be asked. So I've just put the names. Other than this, we will routinely send the blood test, including blood gas. We usually don't do an ABG. We do the arterialized blood gas, that is capillary blood gas. We arterialize the capillary and then do the blood gas. And of course, imaging, which includes mainly the chest X-ray, but we will also have to know a little bit about the ultrasound. Now, whether it's a cardiac, pulmonary, or a metabolic, the things which I was saying. So clinically, how you can say, so if there is cyanosis, and if it is associated with marked chest retraction and saturation is low with oxygen therapy, saturation improves with oxygen therapy, it is pulmonary cause. Whereas if there is cyanosis with marked respiratory distress and has low saturation, both in room air and with oxygen, the cardiac cause is likely. So with chest retraction, more likely to be pulmonary, and it improves with oxygenation. If there is not marked respiratory distress and has low saturation, both in room air and with oxygen, think of cardiac cause. So if there is improvement of saturation with oxygen, if echo is not available, you can do a hyperoxia test. Very important, another thing is PPH, and often we find it. So here how we will suspect, if the degree of hypoxemia is disproportionate to the severity of lung disease, you are not getting enough clues in the chest X-ray. If there is differential cyanosis, so the preductal and postductal saturation is more than 5%. In some books, it is written more than 3%, but in neonates, it is usually taken out to be more than 5%. And if there is labile hypoxemia, that is fluctuating saturations with oxygen, always think of PPHN. And in all this, do an echocardiography to confirm your diagnosis. So another important is a metabolic cause. We often get patients with metabolic acidosis, things of IM. So neonates with deep, rapid or labored breathing, what we call as Cushman's breathing, then think of metabolic acidosis. So once you have suspected something, do an order an X-ray. So the main differential diagnosis comes out from the respirator by looking at the X-ray. So if we have a abnormal chest X-ray, then we have to think of this other causes. Look for abnormality of neuromuscular. It may be a diaphragmatic or chest wall problem. It may be some cardiac problems with normal heart shadow. It may be some airway anomalies. And of course, the others, out of which I said metabolic, polycythemia, and so on. And you should also check for the perfusion, BP, and hematocrit. As I said, polycythemia, often we get a baby with polycythemia having RDS. Whereas if you have abnormalities in X-ray, what are the common things we get? We get RDS, TTN. We will come to this X-ray findings, aspiration syndrome, pneumonia, ear licks, effusion, and pulmonary edema. These are the common findings that we get. And uncommonly what we get, and we often get diaphragmatic hernia, sometimes even eventration, though it is said that it doesn't present with respiratory distress, but we have recently got 2 cases who presented with respiratory distress and had eventration, not diaphragmatic hernia. So trachephaseal fistula, cyst tumors, hypoplasia, hemorrhage, congenital liver emphysema, cystic adenomatous malformation, and all those. Now, what are the next important investigation? Rather, it's a part of the examination. This is pulse oximetry. And what is the working principle of this pulse oximetry? It is the spectrophotometric evaluation that we do. And the working principle is we pass lights of 2 different wavelengths. One is 660 nanometer and one is 940 nanometer. When it is passed through the tissues, the lights are absorbed by the tissues and part of it is reflected back, which is captured by this machine. And the amount of light which is reflected back and captured by the machine depends upon the relative amount of oxygenated and deoxygenated hemoglobin present in the blood. So this is how this pulse oximetry measures this saturation. Now, very important, I have seen someone asking target oxygen saturation, one of the external examiner to our MD candidates, and he couldn't answer, not this year, I think 2 to 3 years back, couldn't clearly answer this. So very important is target saturation. What should be the target saturation? Previously, it was said that for term, it is 90 to 95%, and for preterm, a lower saturation was preferred. But most of the studies, it was around to the tune of 85 to 89. Some says to the tune of 88 to 92% in preterm. But this lower saturation target was seen to be associated with higher mortality in preterms. And thus, recently, irrespective whether the baby is term or preterm, the target oxygen saturation should be 90 to 95%. And very important to note that pulse oximetry is not at all a good instrument to detect hyperoxia. So I think the PGTs knows whenever I see 99, 100%, I scold them why it is 99%, 100%, reduce the oxygen. And why it is so? Because if the saturation is above 95%, the PaO2 may vary from 80 to 300 millimeter. You will not be able to understand what PaO2 you are actually giving, because the oxygen dissociation curve, if you remember, it has a sigmoid shape. So the upper part, you cannot really understand. It might show 97% maybe for 110, and it may be also for 290 millimeter of PaO2. So it is not a very good for hyperoxia, to detect hyperoxia. So there are certain things which causes interference with pulse oximetry reading. These are hemoglobinemia, poor peripheral perfusion, hand movement, skin color. This causes interference, and we have to be cautious about that. The gold standard for measuring arterial oxygen tension is not SaO2. What we see is a PaO2, but it is an invasive process. So often we have to do a compromise, and we work with pulse oximetry. So there are other two very important things, oxygenation indices and ABG analysis, but these two itself will take around 1 hour to discuss. So I'm just omitting this, but you have to go through this. Especially you have to remember oxygenation indices is very important in ventilated babies, and it is always better than FiO2, and even sometimes better than PaO2. So ABG analysis and ultrasound, we will discuss in detail, I think in separate classes. Now coming to the management, once you have diagnosed, you have more or less diagnosed, you have scored the gradation, you have severity, you scored the severity, how you will give the management. So it is dependent upon supportive management, divided into supportive management and the definitive. Now supportive, Kalke sir bole che, Dr. Ghosh was telling T, A, B, C, D, E, F. So if I go like that, in newborn again, it doesn't begin with A, B, C, D. It always begins with T. So it's always T. So temperature, and then we have A, B, C, airway, breathing, circulation. But glucose always we see at the beginning. So I've kept it euglycemia. You have to ensure normal body temperature and euglycemia. So GU can come later on as G, it can come later on as G, but in neonate, temperature and sugar comes first. So normal, ensure temperature and glucose, euglycemic stage. C, airway, breathing, circulation. Then D for drugs. Drugs has a limited role. If there is babies in shocks, you can go for ionotropes, as I've given in circulation, ionotropes, or initially with antibiotic, unless we rule out sepsis, take that as a drugs. And then E, as sir was telling yesterday, it was environment. So it is very, very important in neonate. You have to have a developmentally supportive care. You have to keep the baby in a proper positions. Though flexion is the best method, but in our respiratory distress, we cannot keep the baby in flex positions. Try to keep the baby in sniffing positions where the respiratory airway will be in a straight line and there will be not a flexion of the airway. Noise, light, pain, all should be reduced, and you should know the normal decibel of NICU should not cross 45 to 50 decibel, but most of the studies have shown the normal decibel, it crosses around, it's 100, 120, and even in our unit, often we get hypertensive when all the monitor starts to beep. Now, next important vary is nutrition and monitoring, M and N. So nutrition, we have to think if there is mild distress, we can start giving NG-tube feed or OG-tube feed. And in moderate distress, it's better to give IV fluid, of course, not in severe distress. And if the respiratory rate is more than 70 to 80, usually we give IV fluid and OG-tube. In OG-tube, you can start tropic feed, just so that there is no, the gut remains active. So you can give tropic feed. And monitoring is very important. Monitoring is mainly to see worsening of distress, monitoring of all the vitals, including saturation, capillary blood gas. You have to see of the hemodynamic stability, CRT, acute kidney injury, which is often common. We have to think of the renal function, heart failure, and so on. Suctioning should not be a routine process, and gastric decompensation is a must when you are giving CPAP. And if you are giving feed to this, and you are, while after giving feed, we close vent of the NG-tube, and it's a practical problem. Always remember to open it after 1 hour, otherwise there may be stomach perforation in neonates, in preterm especially. Definitive management is oxygen therapy, CPAP, HFNC, mechanical ventilation, and antibiotics till sepsis is excluded. And of course, there are certain cases where we might go for ECMO and INO, so we will cover later on. So as I was discussing, initial management, initial assessment by TABC, saturation, assess severity. If the score is 0 to 3, start supplemental oxygen. Not in case of extreme preterm, where we start CPAP in preterm. Score is 4 to 6, we start CPAP. Identify the CPAP failure. And if score is more than 6, post-spontaneous effort, shocks, contraindications, we will start with mechanical ventilation. So oxygen therapy, when the distress is mild, saturation is less than 90%. It is not the modality of choice in preterm, should be continuously monitored by pulse oximeter, as I said. Beware of hyperoxia. Oxygen should be taken as a drug and should be monitored. Flow rates in nasal prongs and head box. This is very important. When you are giving oxygen via nasal prongs, the flow rate should be 0.5 to 1 liter per minute. And in older infants, you can give 1 to 2, not more than 2. So if you are going to give anything more than 2, that air not only should be humidified, but it should be warmed. So in that case, you have to use the HFNC. You cannot give it by nasal prongs. Head box is not a preferable one because it needs a higher flow rate, because it's to the tune of 2 to 3 ml per kg, 2 to 3 liters per minute per kg. And in a bigger child of 2 to 3 kg, you have to give 5 to 6 liters per minute. It's a wastage of oxygen. And why you need a higher flow? To avoid rebreathing, and the so we don't use head box nowadays. We used to do it 9 to 10 years back. Then of course, anyone who is on oxygen, you have to screen for ROP. Now CPAP, this is the most important modes of respiratory support nowadays, and we try to always avoid mechanical ventilations. And it helps, how it helps mechanically to spins the upper airway and chest wall, thus decreasing the airway resistance. It maintains the functional residual capacity. How? By preventing the alveolar to collapse during expiration. It increases pulmonary compliance and activity of diaphragm. The tonic activity of diaphragm is increased by splinting the chest wall. It stimulates the Che receptors. Che receptors are juxtacapillary receptors found in the lungs. As you know, these are mechanoreceptors. When the lungs are stretched, these are this stimulates the Herring-Grohr reflex, which helps to decrease the respiratory rate. Not only this, it also increases the surfactant production. And as I said, the splinting of upper airway and chest wall decreases the airway resistance. Now, there are certain contraindications. I think we have gone with this, so I'm not just over spontaneous effort. The recurrent or severe apnea. So if you have a central cause, so we cannot put the baby on CPAP. To put the baby on CPAP, the baby must have a good respiratory effort. So when we call it CPAP failure, when there is significant grant on retraction, saturation is below 90%, despite a CPAP of 7 to 8, some says 7, it is 8, usually we take it as 8. And FiO2 is requirement is more than 50 to 60%. So we'll take it as a CPAP failure and we'll put it to mechanical ventilation. And if the ABG shows, in spite of 80 pressure, if your ABG shows pH of less than 7.2 and PCO2 more than 60. So these are the indications of mechanical ventilation where there is CPAP failure. Other than that, whenever there is recurrent or severe apnea, shallow respiratory effort, we have to give mechanical ventilations. So any hypoxemia as defined by PaO2 less than 50 or saturation less than 85%, you have to give you have to start mechanical ventilation. And any hypercarbia, if PCO2 is more than 60 and pH is less than 7.2, you should start mechanical ventilation. Now coming to the last important part, that having discussing some of the cases, so it will be interesting. So this is a 37-weeker male who presented with tachypnea soon after birth. So mother was non-diabetic, the liquor was clear, amniotic fluid was clear. There was no risk factor for sepsis on history. The mother didn't receive antenatal steroids. On examination, the respiratory rate was 70 per minute, occasional grunt was there was nasal flaring, and saturation in room air was 86%. And the Downey score was 3. So Downey score is 3, respiratory rate is 70, not more than 80, so we can go for oxygen therapy. And this was the X-ray. So immediately an X-ray was done, and this shows bilateral perihilar streaking. And as you can see, there is a fluid in the interlobar fissure, a very classical thing of TTN. So TTN onset within 6 hours, there is a recovery by 3 to 5 days. And the pathophysiology of TTN is very complex. It is said during the fetal life, the alveolus were filled with fluids. Actually, in the fetal life, the pulmonary epithelium secretes fluid and chloride into the alveolus. Once there is onset of labor, there is liberation of these catecholamines, these adrenalines and glucocorticoids. When there is switching of this secretion of chloride to active reabsorption of sodium, which leads to active reabsorption of fluid. So this occurs by this ENaC. This is the epithelial sodium channels and sodium potassium ATPase. This is very important. This is often asked in the question examiners to the examinees if they answer good. So, and this ineffective activity of this ENaC and sodium potassium ATPase leads to accumulation of fluid in the alveolus and leading to this TTN. There are some studies which shows there is pulmonary immaturity. Babies with TTN have a normal lecithin sphingomyelin ratio, unlike that of RDS, but they have a less amount of phosphatidylglycerol. So this is in one of the studies have shown. And of course, there are genetic predisposition because it has been seen TTN occurs in family, and there is familial clustering of TTN cases. So there may be a polymorphism in the ADRB encoding genes, which encodes for the beta adrenergic receptors. And if there is polymorphism, there will be hyperresponsiveness of these receptors, and this leads to TTN. So in TTN, generally babies can do good with oxygen. They sometimes require CPAP. So the risk factors, cesarean section, as there is no surge of the catecholamine surge during labor. Male babies, late preterms, multiple gestation, macrosomia, and maternal history of diabetes, family history of asthma, narcotic use, fluid overload in mother by using oxytocin. And if there is perinatal birth asphyxia, all this leads to TTN. The chest X-ray we have already discussed, prominent perihilar streaking, fluids in the interlobar fissure. You might get mild pleural effusion and mild cardiomegaly. So ABG is usually not, there is not marked change. You might get mild to moderate hypoxia with mild respiratory disorder. So POCT is often normal, and in some cases it may be less because there is tachypnea and it washes out the carbon dioxide. So TTS is often diagnosed by exclusion. If you get the X-ray pictures, you are lucky. If you don't get, just exclude the other causes and then label it as TTN. So management, as I said, respiratory support. So diuretics, furosemide was supposed to clear lung fluid, is known to clear lung fluid rather, and it causes a pulmonary vasodilation. So it will increase the ventilation perfusion mismatch. So initially diuretics were used, but it is not recommended because all RCT has shown there is no improvement, no difference. Inhaled recipic epinephrine is also not recommended. Beta-2 agonists, salbutamol and albuterol, especially albuterol, So RCT has shows there is improved oxygenations and shortened duration of oxygen therapy if we use beta-2 agonist albuterol. So the prognosis, some may develop prolonged TTN, this is called prolonged tachypnea of newborn, that is when the TTN persists for more than 72 hours to 96 hours, and they can progress to respiratory failure. It may be in long-term prognosis, it is saying that it may be associated with development of wheezing in infancy and childhood asthma. Now coming to very important, the case 2, the 30-weeker who received antenatal steroids 6 hours before birth. So you can see it is only 6 hours before birth, so the steroid is not going to work. Developed respiratory distress soon after birth and reached our hospital 4 hours after delivery. This is also very important. If the babies cannot come to the hospital early, there is mostly we lose the baby. And it's always better to prevent preterm delivery. And if you want to transfer the mother to the facilities where preterm delivery can be taken up. So delivering a preterm baby in a unit and then transferring a baby is always hazardous for the baby. So RDS, you know, this incidence decrease has an inverse relation to the age. So it is to the tune of 88% if its the age group is 26 to 27 weeks, and it decreases to 30% around 32 weeks. So, so type 2 cells, the type 2 pneumatocytes, which secretes a surfactant, starts to differentiate and produce surfactant from 24 to 26 weeks. So any baby who is less than 26 weeks have a 90 to 95% chance of having RDS. So maturity of these cells are enhanced by antenatal corticosteroids, chronic intrauterine stays as seen in PIH, IOGR, and twin babies. And this maturity is decreased by hyperinsulinemic tests. So diabetes mothers will have less matured, have babies with less matured cells, and also in perinatal asphyxia. So prevention, as we know, try to prevent preterm delivery. If it is evident, cannot be prevented, you have to give an antenatal corticosteroid, and this not only reduces RDS, it reduces IVH, NEC, respiratory support, and perinatal mortality. The optimal treatment to delivery interval. So once you have started the antenatal steroid, giving the optimal treatment should be at least delayed for 24 hours to get the maximum result, and it should be done within 7 days. So the drugs are betamethasone and dexamethasone. Both RCOG and ACOG recommends to give till 35 weeks 6 days. Previously it was up to 34 weeks. Now it is till 36 weeks. That is 35 weeks 6 days to all women who presents with preterm labor and going to deliver a baby within 7 days. In case of elective cesarean section, the RCOG guideline is you can give it till 38 weeks 6 days until 39 weeks. Now, test extra features of RDS, you have a low lung volume, you have a symmetrical bilateral reticulogranular pattern. In severe case, you might have bilateral whiteout lung and groundless pattern. An air bronchogram is often seen, which denotes the dilated bronchus against the collapsed alveolus. Of course, the DD is pneumonia due to group B streptococcus and TAPVC. They will have a similar radiological features like RDS. So findings appear shortly after birth and reach maximum severity in 12 to 24 hours. So usually, sometimes if the distress is not that much, you can delay the chest X-ray a little bit to get a better chest X-ray report. So preterm with RDS soon after birth, at delivery room, CPAP, TPs, this is the flow, TPs or intubation and ventilation as NRP guidelines. You then transfer to NICU, reassess and give necessary support. Start IV fluid, monitor CBG, ABG, temperature, vitals, chest X-ray. So if FiO2 is more than 30 to 40% requirement, FiO2 requirement is more than 30 to 40% despite a CPAP of 6 to 7 centimeter of water. And if the saturation is less than 90%, you have to administer early surfactant. It is also given in gestation age, less than equals to 26 weeks. In some centers, less than equals to 28 weeks, irrespective of FiO2. Or if you're doing a mechanical ventilation, so if FiO2 is more than 21%, I'm not going into detail because these are very theoretical. So in older preterms, If chest X-ray shows mild RDS and respiratory distress not worsening, you continue the respiratory support and reassess. So in fact, every preterm you don't have to give a surfactant. So this is a picture in the figure 1 which shows surfactant, how it acts. So it has a hydrophilic end and a hydrophobic end. So these are the hydrophilic ends which attaches to the water and the hydrophobic end towards the air. So this is the air-water interface. So what happens when the baby is in the fetus, the baby is in the mother's womb, the alveolus are filled with water only, fluid. So once, and this fluid, this water molecules attract each other and they have a very high surface tensions because the water molecules, the hydrogen bonds, they attract each other, okay? So once there is delivery of the air enters, as you can see, the air has entered and the fluid is getting absorbed. But in this air and fluid interface, the air cannot interfere with these water molecules to reduce the air surface tension. So this is done by this surfactant layer. As you can see, the surfactant layer is in between the water and air interface. Water and air interface, because they have their molecule is like that. One end is hydrophilic and one end is hydrophobic. So hydrophilic end towards the water and hydrophobic ends away from the water. And once they get attached like this in the air-water interface, they reduces the surface tensions by reducing the attraction between two water molecules. So this is how it works. And if you know Laplace law, this pressure is required to inflate is always equals to 2T by R. So if you reduce the surface tension, T is tension, so pressure requirement will be reduced. Or other way, if you can increase the radius, so if you can inflate the alveolus a little bit, the pressure requirement to inflate further is reduced. So this is Laplace law. It is the basic how RDS occurs. Okay. Now, early surfactant therapy means we'll be giving surfactant within 2 hours and late surfactant therapy after 2 hours. So this is the importance why if you can shift the baby within 2 hours to an ICU, to a center who can give surfactant, it's always better. So meta-analysis by WHO has shown in preterm infants who are intubated for RDS, administration of early surfactant results in decrease in pneumothorax by 30%, neonatal mortality by 13%, CLD by 30%, but there is no effect on other conditions like pulmonary hemorrhage, PD, ICH, neck, ROP, and BPD. Early surfactant use is very much essential, but its use in India is limited due to high cost of the surfactant, lack of skilled personnel. What we do usually insure. So you have to intubate, give surfactant, and extube. But if the baby is not in a mechanical ventilation, so you need a person who should be skilled to do an intubation, and lack of support system. So these are the why early surfactant is not given. So in developing countries, CPAP may be used as a primary mode of management in RDS. Surfactant therapy may be reserved for non-responders to CPAP. So what we should do, we now need to explore simpler methods of administering surfactant which do not involve intubation. And these are LISA, this is the less invasive administration, less invasive surfactant administration, and MIST is minimally invasive surfactant therapy. So we should go for this. I think if Preeti has joined, we are planning to do a study on using this LISA. CPAP in RDS. So if the baby cannot maintain saturation with oxygen, we give CPAP, and it is a preferred mode. We give early CPAP to start in all newborns at risk of RDS. By this, we can spare sometimes surfactant use and we can reduce the cost. But if we start CPAP without giving surfactant, sometimes the risk of pneumothorax increases drastically. So we have to keep in mind that. To start with, we do it 5 centimeter and a 30% FiO2, increase by 1 centimeter every 5 to 10 minutes by assessing the baby. We can go up to maximum of 7 to 8 centimeter depending upon the gestational age. If FiO2 cannot be reduced, we don't try to increase the FiO2, we try to increase the pressure, because in RDS the main problem is with the pressure. Now FiO2 can be temporarily increased, should be weaned, but it should be weaned rapidly if you want to. If we have increase FiO2, it should be weaned very rapidly. So consider surfactant if FiO2 requirement persistently more than 35%, and if there is significant chest restriction, or if chest X-ray shows severe disease. So this is a 30-weeker with RDS, came surfactant, 4 hours of life, 4 hours after surfactant administration, that is 8 hours of life. You can see there is expansion of lungs. So this initially improved on CPAP, again deteriorated with increasing need of oxygen and pressure. So repeat dose shows, a repeat dose is needed sometimes. So second dose when it is needed. If FiO2, which was reduced initially, and again it increases by 10%, and MAP is more than, requirement is more than 7, after 4 to 6 hours of first dose, should consider a second dose of surfactant. The chest X-ray is must to rule out pneumothorax, because after giving surfactant, you are thinking it to be you again have to give surfactant, but the deterioration may be due to pneumothorax, or you have to find out some alternative diagnosis. So do a chest X-ray before second administration of surfactant. And of course, rule out pulmonary hemorrhage, shock, and of course, PDA. So if repeated doses of surfactants are required, especially in a term baby, always think of congenital alveolar proteinosis. This is congenital deficiency of surfactant B protein. So here you might have a sibling death, history of sibling death, and repeated need of surfactant, especially in term baby. So this is 15 hours of life. Again, there was whiteout, and 6 hours after repeat dose, you can see the clearing. So should we go or should we stop? Should we take meconium aspiration, PPHN in the next year? Hello?
Yeah, madam. Hope continue.
Should we go for the third case?
ভালো হচ্ছে তো
ম্যাডাম বলবো আবার থার্ড কেসটাও যাই তাহলে
বলে দাও
বলে দাও সো দিস ইজ আ কেস 3 মানে সবার রিটেনশন হচ্ছে কিনা পিজিটিতে বেশি বলা হয়ে যাচ্ছে কিনা বুঝতে পারছি না তো
if they require they you can repeat again
okay so case 3 very common thing. This is the second most common case in developing countries. This is meconium aspiration syndrome. So a term post-dated AGA, birth weight of 3.3 kg male, who was delivered by emergency LUCS. It's an old case, 2 to 3 years back. Head, so we are using oxygen hood, you can see. So head was high floating, less fetal movement, Leica was meconium stent. The Apgar was 1 minute 7/10, and 5 minutes it was 8/10. Developed respiratory distress 15 minutes after birth. On admission, there was tachypnea, tachycardia, there was bilateral fullness of chest, hyperinflation. So hyperinflation, if you see, there is increase in epidiameter. So always think of meconium aspiration syndrome. There is nasal flaring, there is bilateral intercostal costal suction, and the Downey score is 4. So it is 0 to 3, 4. So you can 4 to 6, you can go for CPAP. So saturation in room air, it was very low, 82%. So should we go for oxygen therapy or CPAP? So people are sometimes very much reluctant to give CPAP in meconium aspiration syndrome. Why it is so? Because there are more chance of air leaks in meconium aspiration. We're coming to the pathophysiology. And the CRT was 2 seconds. Chest, there was bilateral vesicular sounds. There was coarse crepitations. Reflexes were depressed. As you can see, this is a classical X-ray of meconium aspiration, patchy, heterogeneous areas of atelectasis interspersed with air trapping. You can see reticulogranular pattern. There are some areas of atelectasis and some areas where there is air trapping. Blood parameters, CBC-CRP was within normal limit. CAP gas shows respiratory acidosis. So this is meconium aspiration syndrome, which occurs within few hours of birth, but can persist longer than TTN and RDS sometimes. And you have to sometimes monitor carefully for high risk of PPHN, and they are also at high risk for pneumothorax. So chest X-ray, as I said, is patchy, heterogeneous, bilateral areas of atelectasis with air trapping, interspersed with air trapping. In severe cases, there may be total whiteout. Now, features of air leaks may be there: pneumothorax, pulmonary interstitial emphysema, or pneumometastasis are frequently seen. So these are the risk factors: gestational hypertension, diabetes. I think I'm omitting this. Now, very important, what happens, why there is atelectasis and hyperaeration. So this meconium, once it's passed, it goes to produce airway obstruction. Sometimes it causes complete obstructions leading to atelectasis of the distal bronch airway. Sometimes it causes partial obstruction leading to a ball valve mechanism where air can go in but cannot come out. And that leads to air trapping. And whenever there is air trapping, and if you give CPAP, there is always a chance of having pneumothorax. So another important thing is chemical pneumonitis. So meconium is an irritant, so it causes chemical pneumonitis. There is liberation of pro-inflammatory cytokine release. And all this leads to cytokine dysfunction and pulmonary hypertension, because whenever there is atelectasis, hypoxia, the alveolar collapse and hypoxia, the pulmonary vascular resistance increases, and this all leads to pulmonary hypertension. So this is the consequence, as I said: mechanical obstruction, air trapping, chemical inflammation. All this led to hypoxia, acidosis, and primary pulmonary hypertension. So this is the, and this is the pathophysiology. So how to manage? So in the delivery room, so whenever you get a meconium stent liquor, so now gone are the days where we used to say thick meconium, thin meconium. Now what we have to see whether the baby is vigorous or non-vigorous. So how do we define vigorous? So any baby who has a heart rate more than 100 per minute, having spontaneous respiration, good respiratory effort rather, and a good muscular tone is vigorous. If the baby is vigorous, irrespective of thin or thick bodium, you just go for NRP algorithm and do the routine algorithm, follow the routine algorithm. If non-vigorous, this baby should be placed under radiant warmer. Do not dry or stimulate. First do the suction and then do drying and stimulation. And we do intubate and suction if someone trained in intubation is available. The recent neonatal resuscitation program recommends against routine ET suctioning and favors resuscitation with positive pressure ventilation after brief suctioning of the oropharynx, because the recommendation is aimed to prevent delay in resuscitation, and minimize the hypoxic ischemia often associated with this meconium amniotic fluid babies. Now, so management continue. You initially will observe and you will put the baby on, check the pulse oximetry, see the TABC, and send for chest X-ray. General measures, as we have mentioned already. And oxygen therapy is very important. As I said, hypoxia leads to pulmonary hypoxia, and alveolar collapse leads to pulmonary vasoconstriction and increases the chance of PPH. And these are the modes. You can go for respiratory support. You can go for oxygen-assisted ventilation, CPAP, of course, with cautions. Mechanical ventilation, if you do, these are the respiratory things we have to, you can give high P, but the PEP, that is peak end expiratory pressure, should be low, and always try to hypoventilate. Sometimes we require conventional ventilation doesn't work, and we refer high frequency oscillatory ventilation and ECMO. Surfactants are deficient in meconium aspiration, and often we have to give surfactant, INO. So, but we don't give INO, we don't have this. And sedation is often needed because these are big babies, often fights with ventilations. Until you rule out sepsis, antibiotic is given. Though meconium is a sterile thing and it causes only chemical pneumonitis, but unless you rule out sepsis, you have to give antibiotic. So these are the criteria of ECMO. I think we need a detailed discussion, and we will do it some other days. And these are the complications of meconium aspiration, which we have to keep in mind. There are very high chance of pulmonary AL, why I have explained. PPHN, why I have explained. Infection is common anyway, and HIE and common comorbid is comorbidly associated with meconium aspiration syndrome. I think we can end here and take some questions.
Yes.
Stop sharing.
Good presentation. It is a vast chapter actually.
হ্যাঁ আমি তাই ভাবলাম কমন গুলো, কিন্তু আমি ভাবছিলাম বেশি হয়ে যাচ্ছে বোধহয় সেজন্য। নিউমোনিয়া, বিপিডি, ডায়াফ্রামেটিক হার্নিয়া, এটাও করতে হবে, ওগুলো অনেক সময় জিজ্ঞেস করে।
সেকেন্ড ফেজ অফ রেসপিরেটরি,
হ্যাঁ স্যার
বলছি সেকেন্ড পার্ট 2 অফ রেসপিরেটরি ডিস্ট্রেস ইন
হ্যাঁ স্যার সেটা মনে করতে হবে, কারণ বিপিডি হয়তো প্র্যাকটিক্যালি অত জিজ্ঞেস করে না,
না
কিন্তু
বিপিডি অত
theoretically-
আমাদের এখানে কিন্তু
হ্যাঁ
বাকি
এইগুলো
তো করতে
প্র্যাকটিক্যাল
হবে।
বেশি, যেগুলো ওই পালস অক্সিমেট্রি, অক্সিজেনেশন, টার্গেট, স্যাচুরেশন এইগুলোই দেখেছি সব জিজ্ঞেস করে, ওই জন্য ভাবলাম
ওগুলোই use
এগুলোই
করে,
বেশি
ওগুলোই
করে
করে।
ডিসকাস। হ্যাঁ
এর বেশি ঢোকে না, এগুলো use করে।
কিন্তু বড্ড বেশি
দুটো।
বেশি ফেলেছি, আর সেটা হচ্ছে একটা, সেই জন্য তো অনেকটা স্ট্রেচ আউট হয়ে গেছে। We should try to focus মানে আর একটু দিতে। তুই বললি যে pulmonary hypoplasia is due to what?
Pulmonary মানে আমি বলছিলাম অলিগোহাইড্রামনিওস থাকলে পালমোনারি হাইপোপ্লাসিয়া ইউ হ্যাভ টু থিংক অফ স্যার, সেটাই বলছি। মানে it is often associated with CDH, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, so we think of this.
অপূর্বদার সাউন্ডটা বোধহয় একটু করতে হবে, সাউন্ডটা ভালো আসছে না।
বুঝতে পারছি না। হ্যাঁ
অপূর্বদার সাউন্ডটা আসছে না ভালো।
Kia, can you hear me?
হ্যাঁ
This is Rashmi. I would like to ask a question. You said that the DD of RDS could be congenital pneumonia or TBVC because the appearance of the X-ray is all similar, and the pneumonia could be. So, what is the antibiotic you start when you get a child with respiratory distress and you still do not yet to differentiate? What is the antibiotic protocol in the unit?
So in our unit, so antibiotic protocol in every NICU can be different, truly speaking. So in our unit, we always start with cephalosporin, cefotaxime. I know it should not be the first line, but we start with cefotaxime and aminoglycoside. So we have to cover gram-negative. Though group B streptococcus, we don't know in our country whether group B streptococcus is common or not, because there are never testing is done that much. But the group B streptococcal pneumonia simulate the X-ray picture of this. And I think this was the question often asked by Sir Dr. Ghosh. কোন দুটো মনে হবে এরকম হবে RDS এর সাথে, একটা হচ্ছে streptococcal pneumonia, একটা হচ্ছে TAPVC, and this is clearly written even in Nelson textbook একদম আছে।
But you know, the recent Danish study from AIMS, which was of course 2011 to 2014, they did a study on their inborn babies. I think it was done in AIMS as well as Safdarjung as well as that Vardhaman. I think Vardhaman is the same thing as Safdarjung, and it was a hospital-based study, and they found that early onset sepsis and late onset sepsis are caused by similar organisms in Southeast Asia, including India.
Yeah, I know that. It's a known fact. It's a known fact. So we say the organisms are common, both in early onset and late onset.
So I think, yeah, that's right.
And that's why we cover with a gram-negative. We don't give stress on streptococcal. We give cover always with a, so our antibiotic is mainly for the gram-negative. We are giving cephalosporin and an aminoglycoside.
Yes, true.
Common reason for the prematurity is also infection, spontaneous onset of preterm labor is infection. So we do need, if it's a spontaneous preterm labor and not just preeclampsia, we do need to start on empiric antibiotics. And if culture is negative, we can stop by 48 hours, which is the norm. So I think it is rational to start antibiotics. And
it's an individual risk factor for early onset sepsis, premature onset of spontaneous
10% of all preterm labors are due to chorionavirus. So unless we are sure, unless the negative, we have to
give antibiotics.
What they do is antibiotics, but we add our own.
And because our
is written in many theoretical, but practically most.
So that's in the West, but as far as we are concerned, I think we go by our stability.
And actually we have plenty of outborns. We don't have a much inborns. That's what I said, na? If you do the statistics of inborn and outborn, inborns hardly comes. They usually come either a little bit of TTN or something like that. Usually they get antenatal steroids, book cases. Outborns are always at risk of developing sepsis.
True. That will be community acquired or whatever.
আরেকটা খেয়া আমাদের এখানে আউটবর্ন থেকে বার্থ অ্যাসফিক্সিয়া কি রকম রেসপিরেটরি স্ট্রেস নিয়ে আসে, সেটাও তো গুড নাম্বার হবে।
এমনি তো বার্থ অ্যাসফিক্সিয়া আমরা কম পাই এখন আগের থেকে, বাট হ্যাঁ নিউরোলজিক্যাল কজ বার্থ অ্যাসফিক্সিয়া, বিকজ নিউরোলজিক্যাল কজ ইউজুয়ালি বলে রেসপিরেটরি ডিপ্রেশন, বাট সামটাইমস রেসপিরেটরি স্টিমুলেশনও হয় এবং দে মাইট প্রেজেন্ট উইথ টাকিপনিয়া অলসো। Usually depressed, and ওদের তো স্যাচুরেশন হাইপোক্সেমিয়া থাকে, এমনি ওরা এলে ভেন্টিলেট করতে হয়।
একটু ডিলে ট্রানজিশনও থাকে এইচআই তে, তো So they will need a little bit of oxygen.
কথা শুনছো তোমরা?
শুনতে পাচ্ছি স্যার, একটু কম ভলিউম।
অপরদা ভলিউমটা বাড়ার কিছু একটা গন্ডগোল হচ্ছে।
The main thing about the central hoche for postgraduates, that will be little irregular. Even if it is slightly tachypneic, but the central breathing, like respiratory,
Irregular.
cardiac, metabolic, are regular, whereas the central is irregular. Central cannot be always একদম smooth tachypnea হবে, that's irregular. আর সেকেন্ড আরেকটা জিনিস যেটা বলছিলাম যে ইটস নট যে আমাদের দেশে গ্রুপ বি স্ট্রেপ্টোকক্কাস কম হয়, we don't have the study as you say, because there was a study in South Africa, মানে আমাদের একটা ধারণা ছিল যে that in Indians we do not have because it's genetic, but South Africa তে যারা Indians তাদের দেখা গেছে যে same incidence of group B streptococcus, and because you cannot differentiate, you will always have to cover that, whether you give penicillin or you give ampicillin, but you will have to cover that. But আমাদের দেশে যেহেতু vaginal florata is mixed and not very good, maybe the streptococcus cannot grow. That is one of the theory, because of the hygienic status of some of the Indian women are not very good. So the group B streptococcus এর সাথে আরো অনেক ব্যাকটেরিয়া থাকে যার জন্য they cannot grow. That is one of the theory why we have less.
না এমনি এনএনএফ থেকে বলে থার্ড জেনারেশন ক্যাপালোস্পোরিনটা ফার্স্ট লাইন অফ ডোজে না রাখতে, সেখানে কিন্তু পেনিসিলিন গ্রুপ এবং অ্যামাইনো গ্লাইকোসাইড, তাও অ্যামাইনো গ্লাইকোসাইডে জেন্টামাইসিন না দিয়ে অ্যামিকাসিন দিতে পারে এবং সিঙ্গেল ডোজ দিতে পারে, মানে ইনফেকশনের ক্ষেত্রে।
We are giving single dose.
কিন্তু এখানে একটা কিন্তু আছে যে আমাদের এখানে সবগুলো তো ব্লাড কালচার হয়, এবং সেই জন্য প্রত্যেকটা ইউনিটে কালচার স্পেসিফিক সেন্সিটিভিটি দেখে তখন কিন্তু আমাদের কাভারেজটা রাখা হয়। এখানে খেয়া যেটা বললো যে
আমাদের তো আউটবোর্ন আসে, তো আমরা তো
আউটবোর্ন আসার পরেও সেখানে তো প্রথমের দিকে দিলে, কিন্তু একটা কালচার পাঠিয়ে তো অ্যান্টিবায়োটিকটা দেওয়া হয়, তাদের কি কালচার আসছে সেগুলো দেখেও কিন্তু একটা ইউনিট প্রোটোকল ফিক্সড অলওয়েজ যে আমাকে পেনিসিলিন অ্যামাইনো অ্যাসিড কম্বিনেশন দিতে হবে সেটা কিন্তু নয়। মানে আমার নিজের ইউনিটের প্রোটোকলটাকে মেইন জোর দিতে হবে, কারণ আমরা যেগুলোকে কেয়ার করি এনি ইউনিট।
So actually the spectrum of organisms that we are getting from outbounds is very, very, very varied, starting from even Acinetobacter, which is really surprising at an early onset sepsis.
নাম্বার অফ পার্সেন্টেজ হাই কোনটা দেখতে হবে,
মানে অন্য হসপিটাল থেকে আসে না।
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম, ওই সেটাই বলছি কি অন্য হসপিটাল থেকে আসে।
Get very bad case, bad organisms.
Study from Delhi AIIMS, Acinetobacter was the most common organism that they got, whereas I think we get Klebsiella, but they got Acinetobacter as a
আমাদের এখানে
we are getting late onset sepsis with Klebsiella. That is the maximum number of cases even our unit had with Klebsiella, followed by Acinetobacter, followed by fungal. But for early onset sepsis as well, which is from other hospitals, we had a predominant, we had varied flora.
যাও ইনফেকশন আবার একটা অন্য চ্যাপ্টার ডিসকাশনে আছে, কিন্তু
আমি নিউমোনিয়া যেটা আনিনি, নিউমোনিয়া আনলে প্রচুর হয়ে যেত।
হ্যাঁ খেয়া থ্যাংক ইউ।
অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করে দিই, we will start Lisa in our unit soon, and we will
সেটাই বললাম তো, প্রীতি আছিস কিনা।
আচ্ছা
talk Khea,
থ্যাংক ইউ খেয়া। তোকে দুটো জিনিস, একটা হচ্ছে সেকেন্ড পার্ট একটা করবি, আর একটা হচ্ছে এনএনএফ থেকে বারবার বলছে যে আইসিএইচ এ একটা এরকম ওয়েব ক্লিনিক্যাল মিটিং করা যায় কিনা, কিছু কেস তুই যদি
আমাদের লিস্ট করা ছিল স্যার, আমার লিস্ট আমার খাতায় এনআইসিইউ রাউন্ড খাতায় পুরো লিস্ট বানানো আছে।
যদি করতে চাস যে কোনো ডেটা একটা যদি বলিস আমি সেটা ফরওয়ার্ড করে দেব।
Actually, when I was in Hyderabad, there used to be regularly monthly NNF meets where every hospital would, every unit, actually ওখানে তো tertiary neonatal care unit ছিল, তারা কেস প্রেজেন্ট করতো, যেমন আইপি মিটিং হয় সেরকমই প্রেজেন্ট করতো।
আমাদেরও হতো, লাস্ট ইয়ার তো আমরা আইসিইউ শুরু করেছিলাম, ওরা আমাকে বলেছে লাস্ট মার্চে আমরা করেছিলাম।
এবছর একটা তাহলে দেখ পরের মাসে বা এই মাসের মধ্যে করতে পারিস না।
যারা ফার্স্ট ইয়ার জয়েন করেছে, হাউ টু আর্টেরিয়ালাইজ এ ক্যাপিলারি ব্লাড, তুই তো বললি, বাট ইউ ডিডন্ট এক্সপ্লেইন, because many of them don't know.
ABG স্যার, ABG অক্সিজেনেশন ইনডেক্স সব পড়াতে হবে আলাদা করে স্যার, ইট টেকস কি প্রিকশনস নিতে হয়, সেটা ওইগুলো এমনি এত বড় হয়ে যাচ্ছিল তাই আমি ওগুলো বেশি বললাম না।
ঠিক আছে
স্যার, অনেক কিছু আছে তো, মানে প্র্যাকটিক্যাল টিপসও প্রচুর আছে, মানে
ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ কেয়া।
থ্যাংক ইউ প্রিজিত। ওরা তো কিছু কোয়েশ্চেনই করছে না।
না, পিজিটি দের কিন্তু আরো ইনভলভ হতে হবে। ওরা কিন্তু কখনোই কোনো কোশ্চেন করছে না। অপূর্বদা কমেন্ট করছে, আমরা তো
আরে
কমেন্ট করছি।
ওরা তো খুলে দিয়ে চলে যায়। যেমন
ভিডিও অন রাখতে বলুন।
আচ্ছা, আর একটা জিনিস খেয়া, পিজিটি দের জন্য আমি বলছি, তোর জন্য না। তুই যে দুটো কেসই বললি, দুটো কেসেই কিন্তু মোড অফ ডেলিভারিটা তুই কিন্তু ওখানে বলিসনি। স্টুডেন্টরা যখন প্রেজেন্ট করবে, যদিও সবই এলিউসিয়াস, হ্যাঁ না তোর যে প্রেজেন্টেশনে দেখ নেই মোড অফ ডেলিভারি, সবই এলিউসিয়াস জানি, কিন্তু স্টুডেন্টরা কিন্তু পরীক্ষার সময় বলতে হবে মোড অফ ডেলিভারিটা বলতে হবে।
না,
মোড অফ ডেলিভারির উপরে যেমন আরডিএস
নিতে হয়, নেটাল হিস্ট্রি কি নিতে হয়, পোস্ট নেটাল হিস্ট্রি কি নিতে হয়, ইন রিলেশন টু দ্য কেস, প্রত্যেকটি কেসের জন্য তো আলাদা আলাদা জানতেই হবে।
একটা প্রিটার্ম বেবির খেয়াল, লাস্ট কোশ্চেন টু, একটা প্রিটার্ম বেবির রেসপিরেটরি ডিস্ট্রেস হচ্ছে এট 2 আওয়ার্স, আমি এক্সরে করব কি করব না?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, করব স্যার।
কত আওয়ার্সে করব?
আটকে যাচ্ছে কোনো কারণ আজকে,
মানে
কানেকশন মধ্যে গন্ডগোল হচ্ছে।
বেশি পিকচার হতে দেরি হতে পারে, বাট তা বলে আমি তখন কেন করব না? তখন ডেফিনেটলি করব।
এক্স্যাক্টলি, কারণ
Actually, everybody thinks they'll do at 6 hours and wait for TTN and settle, but preterm may be better to do it early so that you can think of giving surfactant.
আমার একটা জার্মান হাউস স্টাফ ছিল ইংল্যান্ডে, ওর নাম ছিল হারমান মেয়ার। তো ও খুব রিজিড, না 4 ঘন্টার আগে আমি এক্সরে করব না।
ওরকম মেডিসিনে রিজিডনেস হয় না।
তো আমি বললাম এটাকে আক্ষরিক কর, এর তো ইস্যু হয়েছে। তারপরে দেখা গেল যে তার ডায়াফ্রামেটিক হার্নিয়া আছে, অ্যান্টিনাটাল ইনলিস্ট হয়েছে। তো যদি ডিস্টেন্স বেশি হয়, ইউ শুড ডু ইট আর্লি। আমারটা শোনা যাচ্ছে না, না এটা হঠাৎ করে কেন
না, আজকে কিছু একটা গন্ডগোল হচ্ছে আপনার কানেকশনের।
এর আগের দিন আমার তাই হয়েছিল, হঠাৎ চলে গেল ভয়েস।
না, তোর ক্লিয়ার ছিল, তোর ক্লিয়ার ছিল। আজকে অপূর্বদার কোনো একটা কানেকশন গন্ডগোল হচ্ছে বোধহয়।
আমি তো বকেই গেলাম।
আমার এখানে কিন্তু পরিষ্কার শোনা যাচ্ছে, এটাই করেছি, এখানে কোনো অসুবিধা হচ্ছে না।
সোমনাথ ভালো শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
সময় আমার লাস্ট পার্টটা একদম শুনতে পাচ্ছিলাম না, আমি কানের কাছে ধরে শুনলাম।
যারা মানে ওদিকে
ঠিক আছে, থ্যাংক ইউ কেয়া, আই এম লিভিং নাও।
আমি ম্যাডাম ভাবছিলাম ম্যাডাম নিশ্চয়ই কিছু বলবেন, জিজ্ঞেস।
কি আর বলবো বল।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
ম্যাডামের সময় থেকে তো এখন সব পাল্টে যাচ্ছে আস্তে আস্তে।
ম্যাডাম আমাদের থেকে কত পাল্টে গেছে আমি সেটাই ভাবছি। আমরা
অ্যাসপিরেশন ঠিক আর এই নিয়েই তো আমরা পড়েছিলাম।
ঠিক ঠিক এখন আর তো নেই,
এখন আর নেই, পাল্টে যাচ্ছে।
ঠিক আছে কেয়া,
থ্যাংক ইউ,
থ্যাংক ইউ, থ্যাংক ইউ,
থ্যাংক ইউ কেয়া।
খেয়াদি, তোমার চার্ট গুলো খুব সুন্দর করতে পেরেছো। অ্যারো ট্যারো গুলো খুব সুন্দর, একদম মানে গুড স্টুডেন্ট।
একদম সোমনাথের সাথে গিয়ে সেদিন শিখেছি কি করে বক্স বানাতে হবে, অ্যারো দিতে হবে।
আরেকটা তুই এক্সরেতে যেটা দেখি, কি শুনতে পাচ্ছিস কিনা জানি না, আমি লিভ করেছি, শুনতে পাচ্ছিস?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, হ্যাঁ।
রেসপিরেটরিতে সব সময় চেস্ট এক্সরেতে ফিচারস আছে, কার্ডিয়াকে নেই, কিন্তু কার্ডিয়াকেও অনেক সময় কিন্তু আর্লিতেও ফিচার পাওয়া যায়। সব সময় অতটা ক্লিয়ার নয়, রেসপিরেটরি ডেফিনেটলি, কিন্তু কার্ডিয়াকেও অনেক সময় ফিচার এসে যায়।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, মানে কার্ডিওমেগালি থাকতে পারে বা ইডিমা, পালমোনারি ইডিমা সেরকম থাকতে পারে। ঠিক আছে, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
শুনেছি, ঠিক আছে রে, ঠিক আছে।
আচ্ছা, আমি তাহলে ক্লোজ করছি।
হ্যাঁ, গুড নাইট এভরিবডি।
গুড নাইট।